All right, so we are going to begin now. Those of you who are online, welcome. For those of you who are in person, welcome. I see some of you are still signing on. Jean, Al, Vivian, David, Sandra, Monica. Welcome everyone that's here. Today we're going to skip a lesson. We're going to go to lesson number 5. And the next week we're going to go back to lesson number 4. The reason that I chose to do that is because lesson number 5 is kind of a heavy-duty lesson, and I just don't feel that it would be one to end off with. But at the same time, it's a very important one, of course, as you will soon see exactly what I mean. Let's get this included. Okay. Let's get this being shown. Let me show you my screen. Those you are in here. And a slideshow from the beginning. Okay, so those of you who are online, you could see now. Lesson 5. I want to begin, hopefully those of you who are online could hear me well. I want to begin by talking about the time that we're in. This is called the month of Adar. We have just entered the month of Adar. Shabbos yesterday was Rosh Chodesh Adar. Today is the second day of the month of Adar, which is the 11th month in the year in the Jewish calendar. And our sages tell us, Mishenichnas Adar Marbe Misimcha. When the month of Adar enters, we have to add and increase in joy. And this is the most joyous month on the Jewish calendar. And joy that's not necessarily associated with anything specific. Of course, it's the holiday of Purim, which is the most joyous holiday on the calendar. But aside from that, it's a time just to increase in joy and happiness. And so everything that we'll talk about today should not bring any sort of grief or sadness. It should only bring joy, and it should only bring ways to increase in joy. And of course, this entire course is about how happiness thinks, bringing happiness and joy into our lives. This lesson, as I said, we're going to lesson number 5, which is when joy seems elusive, coping with the pain of loss. This is the most difficult lesson to teach because it talks about real difficult challenges in joy, in real tragedies that people face. And I think it will also be very apropos if we dedicate this lesson today to those students who were killed in 2018 in the high school in Parkland. That it was February 14, 2018, when that murder took place, and among them some Jewish students as well. A very big tragedy. They say that Morris Schwartz was on his deathbed, and he realizes the end is near. So he asks the nurse, "Could you please call in my wife, daughter, and 2 sons?" He turns to them and he says, "Bernie, I want you to take the Beverly Hills houses. Sandy, I want you to take the apartments over in the Los Angeles Plaza. Jaime, I want you to take the offices over in the city center. Sarah, my dear wife, please take all the residential buildings downtown." The nurse is blown away. She says, "Wow, Mr. Schwartz, I didn't realize you were such a hardworking man that you've accumulated all those properties." The wife looks back and says, "What properties? That's my husband's newspaper route." So when it comes to death, when it comes to tragedy, we have to look how to find happiness that will help us in this approach. We need to explore a very unique Jewish approach to this challenge and happiness. And we'll see how, as Jewish people, or as the Torah tells us, there is a different perspective in how to go about it. And I think this will also help us bring a year of grief, which is now just about a year since the coronavirus hit the United States. It happened just at the end of February, and at the beginning of March, because I remember it was right after Purim when the country was officially shut down. So you're talking basically about a year of what all different kinds of suffering and tragedies that have been associated with everything that happened over the last year. So before we discuss the Jewish approach, we're first going to look at the more common reported human responses to traumatic loss, and then we're going to examine the Jewish approach to it. The most common cited psychological model for how do we deal with death is what would be known as the 5 stages of grief. American psychiatrist Dr. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross is the one who put this together. She wrote a book called Death and Dying, and she introduced the 5 stages of grief. They did a research with terminally ill and very emotionally troubled patients, and they saw that these reactions to grief and how it came about, and the stages that it came about, going from a chronic illness or a death of a loved one. No, it's not necessarily death. It could be different tragedies that a person deals with. It could be a financial loss, a major financial loss. It could be the end of a major relationship. So it's not necessarily we're only talking about death, but it could be any types of grief, essentially. So the first one is denial. And this is because the reality of loss is hard to face. So one of the first reactions is to attempt to shut it out, to not believe it, to get rid of the magnitude of the reality of the situation, and develop a false or reality to what this is. The second thing is anger, a sense of outrage, what has occurred to him or her. You're plagued with the question of why me? How could God allow this to happen? God is departed from his loved ones, and they so close to the onset of the things that should be good, and then all this tragedy is happening, and you looking for blame for the tragedy. The next stage is what we call bargaining, where the person makes all sorts of bargains with himself or with a higher power in the hope that it could somehow undo the cause of grief. And then you have depression, that as the reality begins to seek in, a depression takes hold, life is over, there's no point of going on, and the person withdraws, and loneliness, and becomes paralyzed, etc. And then finally, the last level, the ultimate, is acceptance. And acceptance is when you come to terms with it, it's a new reality, and you have to deal with this emotional equilibrium, that this is the new reality of life. I think that if we take a look at what happened over the last year, I think many people actually experienced this in some way or another, these different stages. In the beginning, people didn't want to believe that it's true, denial. Then there was a lot of anger. Then you had some bargaining, and eventually depression, and then acceptance for many. And knowing that this is the new reality that we live in, as people would use the term. This is our new reality. So, has anybody here experienced any major loss or grief or something that they feel that really has been difficult in their life?
Ever or during this year?
Ever.
Divorce.
Okay.
Celebration. It depends.
Yeah.
My father died on February 14th.
Really?
Yes, and tomorrow is his
Hebrew yard site.
yeah, his birthday.
So today. So
There were two Adars.
yeah. Well. This year there's only one, so it doesn't matter. But in leap year it would matter.
It's hard to figure out.
What's the Hebrew date? Do you know? Which day in Adar? You don't know.
No, I don't.
Okay.
But I know I have to figure it out. I think the year he died, it might have had two Adars.
My husband died 7 years ago from dementia. Okay. I'm sorry to hear that. So, someone else wrote something here. Loss of parents, not seeing the kinder, loss of friendship now, Monica. Okay, so we're going to take a look at exercise 1 that you have in your book. Drawing on your own experience mourning the past of a loved one or being with a close friend or family member who went through that experience. Which of the grief stages do you believe are beneficial and necessary, which are not beneficial but unavoidable and simply not be allowed to run their course, and which are not beneficial and, in your belief, can be actively overcome or avoided altogether? Circle the phrase that applies in your opinion. I'm not going to ask you to tell me what your opinion is, but just for yourself. Denial. Do you think denial is beneficial and necessary? Do you think it's not beneficial or unavoidable? Do you think it's not beneficial or can be avoided or overcome? The next one is anger. Do you think it's beneficial? Do you think it's not beneficial, but unavoidable? Or do you think it's not beneficial and can be avoided? And depression. Do you think it's beneficial? Do you think it's not beneficial and unavoidable? Or do you think it's not beneficial and can be avoided? And I want you to ask yourself what you think each of these, and then at the end of the lesson, we'll revisit these questions. Yeah.
In reality, people go through these and go back and forth and back and forth. I worked with cancer patients for 30 years, 15 inpatient, 15 outpatient, and getting that diagnosis.
Okay. Very good.
Any one of these.
Right, that's true. So some people experience them in different levels, some people in different times, in different orders. That is true. It's not one direct way, that it's not one size fits all. His best friend died, and a month later, dog died. Okay, Sandra, thank you for sharing that. It's not, that everyone may experience it. Some people experience it at different levels in different ways. So let us look, as we've seen, a significant component of the stress that is experienced when one loses a loss of a loved one. So one of the things that typically is felt is the injustice of death. So let's take a look at the story in the Talmud, in the Medrash actually, with a great sage, Rabbi Meir, and his wife. Page number 157. I think you weren't here when we started. I'm doing lesson number 5, not number 4 today. And we're going to go back to lesson number 4 next week, God willing. Page number 157. It happens It happened that one Shabbat afternoon while Rabbi Meir, just to give you an idea who Rabbi Meir was, you all are familiar with the Mishnah. And it says that Stam Mishnah Rabbi Meir, which means if there's no name in the Mishnah, it's assumed to be Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir Bal Hanes, known as Rabbi Meir, the one of miracles. So this is what happened, a tragedy in his life. It happened that one Shabbat afternoon while Rabbi Meir was lecturing at the study hall, his two sons died. What did their mother, Beruria, that was her name, do? She laid them on the bed and covered them with a sheet. After Shabbat, Rabbi Meir arrived from the study hall and said to her, "Where are my two sons?" She said to them, "They went to the study hall." Said he to her, "But I looked in the study hall and I did not see them." She handed him a cup of wine for Havdalah. After reciting the Havdalah, he again asked, "Where are my two sons?" She said to him, "They went to a particular place and will soon return." She served him dinner. After reciting the grace after meals, she said, "My teacher, I have a question to ask." Said he to her, "Ask." She said to him, "Before today, someone left an item with me in safekeeping, and he has now come to collect it. Shall we return the item or not?" Said he to her, "My daughter, is not a custodian required to return the deposit to its master?" By the way, we just learned the laws of custodian, this parsha in the Torah portion yesterday. She said to him, "My teacher, if not for your words, I could not have brought myself to return it." What did she do next? She grasped his hand, led him up to the room, brought him near the bed, and removed the sheet from over them. And he saw the two of them lying dead upon the bed. He began to weep, saying, my children, my teachers, my children in a natural sense, and my teachers who enlightened my eyes with the words of Torah." At that moment, she said to him, "Rabbi Meir, my teacher, did you not tell me that we are required to return the deposit to its master? God has given, God has taken." With these words, she consoled him, and his mind was eased and settled. So what we have over here is two different perspectives in what took place. You have Rabbi Meir's perspective, and you have his wife Beruria's perspective. Which one has an advantage or disadvantage? And could they both have been simultaneous? Could you have a combination of the two perspectives? And it says that at the end he was consoled and settled. His mind was settled based on that verse, which we're soon going to learn the source of that verse. So we have two different ways to go about this. So we're going to put this up on the board. You have one which is Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir was actively grieving the death of his children. He weeps, and he also extols his children's virtues. He talks about what they meant to him. He talks about who they were in life. And both of these are important components in dealing with loss, as we'll soon see. His wife, what does she do? She uses a parable to reframe the death in a way that mitigates the sense of injustice that often accompanies the experience of losing one's death, of losing a loved one. By saying, God has given and God has taken. And we're soon going to delve on this a little bit more. Now, while both of these are experienced by two different individuals, a person can at the same time, as we see from here, experience grief over the departure and acceptance that life is given and taken by God. And that fact does not diminish the value and the privilege of grief for what God has given us. Because grief has two elements. Grief has sadness and agitation. And sadness comes from being deprived of love, of joy, from that relationship that was departed. And you also have Beruria, who says that which she's trying to console her husband by saying that it's accepting a new reality, but also realizing what has happened. So her job is trying to bring about the acceptance of the reality by focusing on the true judge. And by him, he was actively grieving, and that is about the soul, and what he talked about was about the soul's enduring soul quality. So we're going to talk about all of these points here, and we're going to break this down a little bit because we're bringing out a lot of points here. So we're going to break it down step by step to understand what exactly we mean by taking these things, by reframing, by talking about the grieving in a way of still accepting, and how to put this all together. So let's first take a look at the verse that she said, Hashem Natan, Hashem Lakach, which is a verse that is actually recited by funerals and at other times of tragedy. And it goes back to Job. Anybody ever heard of Job? Eov, right? Okay, Job, Eov. Text number 2, page 159. Now the day came that Job's sons and daughters were dining and drinking wine at their home, their firstborn brother. A messenger came to Job and said, the cattle were plowing and the she-donkeys were grazing beside him. And Sheba fell upon them and took them, and they smote the youths by sword, and only I alone escaped to tell you. This one was still talking. The other one came and said, a tremendous fire fell from heaven and burned the flocks and the youths and consumed them, and only I alone escaped to tell you. This one was still talking, and another one came and said, children formed 3 bands all around the camels and took them and smote the youths with the sword, and only I alone escaped to tell you. While this one was still talking, another one came and said, your sons and daughters were dining and drinking wine at their home and their firstborn brother, and behold, a great wind came from the other side of the desert and struck the 4 corners of the house. It fell upon the youths who died, and only I alone escaped to tell you. So this is tragedy after tragedy after tragedy that's befalling upon Job, that he's hearing this again and again. As the other one is still talking, another tragedy is happening. What is Job's response? Job stood up, rent his robe and tore his hair, and fell to the ground and prostrated himself, and he said, naked I emerged from the mother's womb, and naked I will return there. God has given, God has taken. Blessed be the name of God. So what is Job's response over here? He's expressing a basic truth, that God created us, everything that we have, including our talents and opportunities that we accomplish. We start with 0. Naked, I come from the womb. I'm coming essentially with nothing. And whatever I'm given, whatever I have during my life is a gift from God. Every moment that we could breathe is another gift from God. And every moment that we're healthy and functioning body, that's a gift. So if we see our lives that's something that belongs to us, that we deserve things, then we feel cheated by death. We feel cheated by things that we don't have because there should be much more given to us. When we recognize that every moment is a gift, then we see that everything that we have, it's like saying if someone comes and gives you, you say, here's a gift, I have $1 million for you. And he says, what do you mean? You should be giving me 2 million. Or if someone wins the lottery and wins $20 million and says, oh man, I should have won 50 million or 100 million. Today it's already up to $1 billion, who knows? So What Job is saying is everything that I have is a gift. It's given to me as a gift. And now that was taken. Beruria, as we saw, took it a step further. And she said even more. She said, not only is it a gift from God, but that every moment of life is a trust from God. We never own it in the first place. She said, these children were given to us to guard, to keep in trust, to safeguard. And you have that period when the deposit is over and the boss comes to take the funds out of the bank. But whichever way we want to frame it, either using both of these or one of these, the point is the same, that we recognize that if we truly see that everything we have and everything the life we have is that God has given us for a reason and a purpose, and that we're giving these gifts at a precise moment of time so that we can fulfill a purpose and appreciate our feelings for what we have and be thankful for what we have, then things like jealousy, anger, and discontent are all misguided. I'm going to take a look quickly at another text, which is in the appendix. I don't want to get too caught up in this, but I know that probably people want to delve on this. I don't want to get too caught up on this because it's really not the point of the class, but let's just take a look on page 175. Just hold your hand where we are. Take a skip a little bit to page 175. This is from Maimonides in the Guide to the Perplexed. About why bad things happen to good people. All bad is only bad in relation to some other state. Indeed, when we say that something is bad, we really mean that something is absent, or that one of its positive properties are partially absent. For example, death is an absence of life. Similarly, illness, poverty, or stupidity derive from the fact that a certain property, health, wealth, or wisdom is partially absent. Therefore, it cannot be said that he does bad, for all that God actively does is completely good. God creates existence, and all existence is good. The bad are simply absences, for God has made the nature of this material state that good will always be partially absent from it. The book which has enlightened the darkness of the world therefore says, which is in Genesis, and God saw all that he had made, and behold, it was very good. Remember what I said in this chapter and understand it, and it will be clear to you everything that the prophets and sages say about the essential goodness of all that God does. In the words of the Medrash, nothing bad comes down from above. So I just wanted to read that just for a little bit of perspective. This class is not about why do bad things happen to good people. Today's class is about being able to have happiness even in times of tragedy. And it's not about the philosophical aspect to it. Before we continue, I should just make it very clear that no one is ever to judge anyone for the way they cope with a tragedy that happened in their life. And no one should ever tell someone that they're in a state of active grief, that it's really, God really did it for the good, and you should be happy for what you had throughout your life, or things of that nature. That's not healthy. You have to be there for them and give them a hug, or during COVID, give them a virtual hug or whatever. But don't work on this. This is for us as individuals to understand in our own self to deal with it, but not to tell people how they should deal with their own challenges in life. Okay. So with this being said, let's take a look now at some very practical aspects of Jewish mourning, and how, based on that, we could see what is the Jewish way to deal with these things so that it should be within the right perspective, framed in the right way, so that it could be dealt with in the right way. This perspective being expressed by Eov and Beruria, the idea of being thankful for what we have, even though we may be sad for what's lost, but still appreciating the fact that it was a gift from God. Judaism, as we talked last week, has a blessing for everything. And Judaism actually has a blessing for death as well, which is Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu Melech HaOlam, as you see in text number 3a, Baruch Dayan HaEmet, blessed is the true judge. This is a blessing that's recited at any time. There's a tragedy. It's recited by the mourners at a time of Shiva, but at a time of a funeral. And this is the very first thing that a mourner says. Blessed is the true judge. No, there is no injustice in God's world. There's no excellence. Many of you, or probably all of you, know what is the most common prayer that is recited upon the death of a loved one. It's the Kaddish prayer. Yet, if you actually look at the text of the Kaddish prayer, it says nothing at all about death, nothing about a soul, nothing about loved ones. It actually basically just Yiskadal v'yiskadash shmei Rabbah b'amad v'rachar say, may the great name of the God be exalted and sanctified in this world that he created according to his will. And it goes on, praising God for everything that we have in this world. That's what the Kaddish prayer is. It's extolling the virtues of God in this world. That's prayer. That's the Kaddish prayer. So you say, what is the connection between these words and death? And the answer is that a mourner has just experienced the most devastating loss that a person could experience, the death of a loved one. He affirms that God created it, that God continues to create every detail of creation according to his, and every detail of his existence is according to his will and according to the way God wants it to be. And therefore, he is the sole dominant of how so many years and moments a person lives and what has happened to this individual. I do have a whole course on this called Journey of the Soul, which I taught a number of times. But this next part of the lesson, actually not next part, but the part after this is going to basically be a short version of that. Because the first thing that we have to know is, number one, blessed is the true judge. Number two, Yiskadal v'yiskadash shmei Rabbah, that in the world that God created, it's according to his will, and God is the sole provider of everything that happens here, and it's all with God's providence, everything that happens in this world. That's the Kaddish prayer. Now, another very important point, and that is this. There's a very fundamental belief of Judaism, that is the eternity of the soul. And the belief in the eternity of the soul alleviates the anguish caused by death. Knowing that we are primarily souls of whose existence precedes and supersedes the physical state that we live in. We're not just physical bodies, but we're also a soul that's taking a journey on this world. And however many years one is given, that soul's taking a journey with this body throughout the world. Today, thank God, we have a very, very good example of this. If you want to use a parable in its own right, something that everybody carries in their pocket. Cell phone. How does this tell you about the soul? Well, this is a piece of plastic or a piece of glass or metal or whatever it's made up of. It's essentially nothing. Tap it. Suddenly, you have apps, you have information, you have stuff that's on here. The phone breaks. No more information on it. Where did it go? It goes into what we call the cloud, so-called cloud. It's still there, it still exists. You just need another device to tap into it. In a very similar way, the soul also is in that way. We are a body that's containing a soul that we can't really see, feel, but we could experience it. Because every moment of our life that we're breathing, that we're seeing, that we're living, that we're speaking, are all part of the experience of the soul. When the soul leaves, the body is basically just a shell from everything that it held. Rabbi Yosef Albo, known as the author of the Ikrim, explained this in a very interesting law in Deuteronomy that says, text 4a, you are children of God, you shall not gash yourselves, nor shall you make any baldness between your eyes for the dead, which is something that some cultures and religions do, all kinds of things of how they go about dealing with death. And it's not specifically this or any type of self defection in any way is not allowed. Self-mutilation or doing anything to oneself to express grief is not allowed. And he explains that on the face of it, it would seem that the very opposite is the case, that this would be a reason to be pained and to mourn excessively over a death. Indeed, the death of a child of a king will be more cause for mourning than that of an ordinary person. Imagine that a person says to his friend, don't feel so bad about the ring you lost because it has a precious gem set in it. The meaning of the verse is as follows. Because you are children of God and a holy and treasured people, it is not fitting that you shall mourn a death excessively, for that would indicate that you believe that the deceased is hopelessly gone, and you are therefore mourning him as you would an earthen pot that was shattered beyond repair. But it is not in the case of death. Rather, it's like a gold or silver vessel that was broken, which can be repaired. For the soul enters into a treasure house of God. Therefore, there is no cause to be excessively pained over this, only as a person would be pained over his friends parting from him to travel to a distant place and gain much wealth by commerce. There should be no doubt that the soul, being holy, will be joined with the holy angels on high. In this way, the Torah indicates that the soul endures after death. So he's teaching us that there's an eternity to the soul. And the eternity of the soul is to recognize that everything, both physical and spiritual, that happens to us lives on and is not diminished by death and is part of everything that we have. And although the constraints of the physical body is not there, in a way that actually makes it even more. Because now you don't have the limitations and constraints of the physical body. And so now it's able to experience the infinity in a much deeper way. And while physically the body is only bound to physical pleasures, but when it's as a soul, it could experience more spiritual pleasures. Just to give you a quick analogy for this, if I tell you the word sweet, what do you think of?
Sugar, candy.
Sugar, candy, what else? Anything else?
Someone who's very nice.
Someone's very nice. You could have a person that's sweet. Children could be very sweet, or they could be obnoxious. Right? Life could be very sweet. Some people may find wine to be very sweet if you have a more finer taste. Some people could find music to be very sweet. So the more refined you go, the more refined that level of sweetness is within your life. So the soul could only experience within the body very, very physical relationship with God. But when it goes beyond, it could experience now a much more spiritual expression of what God means to that soul. So we have 2 points here. The spiritual self lives on and is not diminished by death, and death frees the soul from limitations and constraints of the physical state, allowing it for a deeper and spiritual life. That may be why sometimes people at special times may experience a feeling of the loved ones, like maybe like lighting Shabbat candles. People have told me that they've felt their mother's spirit there with them, or during a time of Yizkor, remembering their soul, or certain spiritual times, you may feel the spirit of a loved one more than at other times. And next, you have the idea, and this is a very Jewish idea. I'm not going to delve on it too much, but it's important to know, that is the resurrection of the dead. This is a fundamental principle in Judaism, taught by the prophets of Israel. We believe that there's going to be a future messianic era where all those who passed away will be resurrected to a physical life. And this is when they are resurrected, they'll return to enjoy the fruits of their labor in this world. This is a Jewish concept stolen by other religions. It's originally a Jewish concept, and we believe, one of the 13 principles of faith, that this will happen and that Mashiach will come. It will be a messianic era when souls will return to their bodies. As a side note, parenthetically, this is one of the reasons that we are very much against cremation, because cremation destroys the body and does not allow for this to happen. Someone who is cremated doesn't have this blessing of Tchias HaMesim, of resurrection of the dead. In general, cremation is something that is not allowed in Jewish law. The second thing that we talked about, the fact that the body is together with the soul, and that the soul is part of the experience of everything that happens in this body. So just like if you have a Torah scroll that is very holy because of the precious letters that are written on it, even though it's just a physical parchment, or the same way you have tefillin or something that could be holy by the spirit that is on it, the same thing, the body is holy because of that spiritual soul that housed it, that it was housing. And therefore the body is considered holy, and we don't burn things that are holy, we bury them. And there's other reasons as well that I'll point out, but it's very important to talk about this. We had a full lesson on this. We had someone come and speak about it. We'll note some other things that we'll see as well associated with that. But it's one of the big issues today, people choosing cremation, and it's not at all within the Jewish spirit. Next thing, any questions so far? With all this being said, let's take a look at the Jewish way in mourning. And what are some of the key observances that we do as Jewish people to mourn those who have passed? Now, number one, it's important to note that this is actually a mitzvah. As we see in text number 5, page 165, it is imperative commandment of the Torah to mourn the death of the close relatives. In other words, it's not just something that the mourning is because it makes someone feel better, but it is actually a mitzvah in the Torah to mourn properly. Just like one is obligated to wear tefillin, to observe Shabbat, to eat kosher, one is obligated to mourn. Now, what are the steps of mourning? You have them in figure 5.2. Let's take a look. Step number 1 in mourning is called kriya, where one renders or tears their outer garments. And this is a sign of mourning, because when one experiences the grief, it is natural to want to express that. And what Judaism does is allows a person to physically express the grief in a way that could be felt. We're going to talk about these all as we get on. Again, parenthetically, it's become tradition that that funeral homes give out these little pins, these little black pins, and you cut them. That does not constitute kriya. Kriya is tearing one's garments, and sometimes someone may feel numb. They're not able to grieve. That also helps them actually physically express grief, and actually brings a person to experience and feel the grief. So the Torah feels the importance of actually being part of that. And in other words, making it part of your life. It also reminds us that grief is only in the outside, and just like the soul, it still exists. We're only tearing the outer garments. The burial that's taking place is only with the outer garment of the soul, which is the body. Next one, many of you have heard of. Okay, so a mourner tears his outer garments. Opposite the heart is a sign of mourning. Next thing is called Shiva. It's a 7-day mourning period. And there's a few things that you may not know about Shiva. Mourners are forbidden to work during the Shiva period. And it's a mitzvah to visit the mourner and speak about the life of the deceased. And now I'm going to, again, take a little digression. When people come to Shiva houses, they think that the best way to deal with it is to try and joke around and make the mourner forget about it, so to speak, and let's take your mind off this for a moment. So we'll tell some jokes and we'll party and we'll eat some good food, and let's order Katz's Deli and have some lox and bagels and have a good time, and then you'll forget about it. No, that's not Shiva. You're actually not allowed to speak until the mourner opens. If you want to say anything, what you should speak about is extolling the virtues of the one who has deceased, as we read earlier in the story of Reb Meir. Share, if you knew the person, share a story that's meaningful about their life, how their life has impacted you, or ask the mourner, can you tell me a little bit about father, mother, whoever it is, some things that have impacted them? In other words, make it about the mourner and the grief they're going through, and about the deceased, because their soul, the deceased soul, is there during that time of Shiva as well. Then there's the Shloshim, which is practices that are continued for 30 days, certain practices. And then to certain things, you can't buy new clothing, can't get a haircut, you can't participate in festive occasions. And then you have the merit of the soul, which is typically Kaddish recited for 11 months by the mourner on every yard site. Sorry, I'll picking this up here on this side. And then also doing good deeds such as charity, Torah study, particularly Mishnayos, because Mishnah is the same words as Neshama, which means soul. And it's all dedicated for the elevation of the soul, doing special things in their honor and in their memory, especially for the next 11 months. It's important to know that these practices are mandatory according to the Torah, according to Jewish law, whether the mourner is experiencing grief themselves or not. It is natural to feel grief when, for example, a young person is tragically killed, like we mentioned, which happened today, and people become very emotional about that, rightfully so. That doesn't, however, negate if it's an older person. If someone's mother dies at 103 years old, these laws still apply. And even if one wants to say, well, at least we got her out of her pain, which is something typically that I hear, at least she's out of pain. Well, that's still something to mourn about. And tearing one's garments in the Shiva, this is a process that helps the person, so to speak, get back to normal and resume daily routine only after these days go about. The first 3 days and the 4 days afterwards. And whoever does not mourn, the Torah says, is a cruel person. It's important to mourn, and it's part of a process. I've seen times that people say, let's forget about it. Let's go out to eat. Take it off our minds. No. Take 7 days. It's more difficult in the first 3 days. The first 3 days, it's not actually a good time to go to mourners unless you're a very close friend or family. Better to go in the other 4 days when they're becoming to ease a little bit more, and to deal with it during that time and to allow you to overcome it. Yeah.
So 7 days is so very appropriate, that's what you're saying to do.
Mm-hmm.
What happens if 7 years later, the person is still?
Yes.
And how does that go along with your thing about don't judge other people, don't.
That's actually the next text we're going to look at. Oh, good question. So on one hand, we learn that every life is given to us is a gift, and God is the true judge. And we learn that the souls live on, and to not overly be mourning, but at the same time, we say that it's important to mourn and to know that this is something that is real. Grief is real, loss is real, and there has to be a mourning to it as well. And so, as you're asking, so what about the other way? What if a person says that they don't want to grieve at all because it's a gift? It's a gift given from God. God gave, God took. Or the opposite, a person can't get over it. So take a look at text number 6. Do not weep for the dead and do not bemoan him, says Jeremiah, meaning, do not weep for the dead more than its measure, and do not bemoan him more than it is limit. How so? 3 days for weeping, 7 days for eulogy, 30 days for refraining from grooming and hair cutting. Beyond this, God says, do not be more compassionate towards him than I am. Why do we say that it's not good to be over excessive? So we're going to explain this to understand this a little bit more. And that is this paradox. This paradox. If God is a true judge and God is the gift and trust, then why mourn at all? And if we're supposed to mourn, why is too much mourning forbidden? This is what we're going to deal with now. So to understand this, we have to understand that there's actually two sides to grief. And when we understand this, we'll have a better perspective on the difference between the Jewish way in mourning and the Kubler-Ross perspective on mourning. And that is as follows. When we talk about grief, you could be talking about two entirely different expressions and feelings. On one hand, grief could be an outrage or unacceptance. This is not what the Jewish view in grief is. Grief means you're sad for the emptiness, for the loss. It's a feeling that's inside, not one that's made up of anger, of outrage, but one that's made up of sadness. Like I said, it's the month of Adar. We have to be talking about happy things, but this is the way it fell out. And this is how the Jewish approach in mourning differs fundamentally from the other approach. What are three of the things out of the five? The three main ones: denial, anger, depression. Are these coming from outrage and non-acceptance, or are they coming from emptiness and loss? When you want to say that it's not acceptable, this is wrong, this is unjust, it cannot be, that is denial, anger, depression. 3 out of the 5 that's mentioned. The other 2 are not really relevant to the discussion here. But that's not what the Jewish way in grief is. Grief means I'm accepting what happened, accepting that God is the true judge, accepting that this was a gift that was taken, but it doesn't mean I'm not sad about it. Doesn't mean that it's not something that brings an emptiness inside, a feeling of loss, a feeling of sadness, a feeling of emptiness. That's different than saying angry, denial, I'm mad about what happened. And when we regard life as a divine gift and a sacred trust, then we resist the "this is wrong" approach. We don't have that feelings which says that this should not have happened. We're reminded that God is the true judge. God has given, God has taken. And so therefore, feelings of anger, of blame, of anguish, of non-acceptance, we don't fall prey to those feelings. And this is why there could also be a limit on the length of time, because our sages say, do mourn. But what are you mourning? Are you mourning with an outrage, or are you mourning with a sadness and a loss? If the grief is constantly going to be anger, then that brings about depression, and it's a bottomless pit. If you feel that you're a stranger in this world, that you don't even know why you're here, there's no reason to be here, there's no purpose here, then that just brings to more depression. The true judge means that we accept that the finite life is what we have. It's exactly that. It's finite. It's limited. And there are things that are going to be taken away. This is a physical phase. It's a limited duration of what's going to be during this time. But on the other hand, the feelings of loss and emptiness are very real. And the Torah, it validates those feelings and understands that that's something that's true. And so, therefore, the Torah says if someone is going to be grieving forever, then that means that they're not also accepting Baruch Dayan Ha'emet, blessed be the true judge. Now, as I said, I should point out, you said not to judge anyone. That's true. But it's important to learn a Jewish perspective, and when learning this perspective, it will help someone get through it. Yeah.
The emptiness and loss, you were talking about 7 years and continuing to mourn. When you have somebody that, like mother, father, that you lose, there's always, at some point, something that's going to click that says, wow, I really miss them. I want to call them now. I want to tell them what a wonderful day I had.
Right.
And they're not there. And that could be 20 years, that could be 30 years. So I don't think that the mourning itself
Right.
or the acceptance, I mean, you're accepting the loss, they're gone, but you still always have that emptiness and
Right.
that loss because they are part of your soul.
Right. So I'm just going to repeat what you said so the people listening online could know. Wendy's pointing out that that you still have the loss there, and you still have the feeling of emptiness there, even for many years later, and that's true. But that there's a difference between the feeling of loss and the active mourning. Okay, the active mourning is what we're referring to, and there's another thing that we're going to call post-traumatic growth, which we're going to get to in a moment, and that's going to be ways that you could actually take those feelings and turn it into something positive, as we're going to soon see. But let's just take a look back at the things that we said before based on what we now know and the key mourning practices that we learned before, which are to bring grief in a way that brings healing and consolation, not feelings of denial and anger. And of course, the laws of Torah and mitzvahs are multifaceted, and this is just one perspective. There's many ways to talk about it. So we saw, for example, the idea of Kriya. The purpose of Kriya. What is the purpose of Kriya? Counteracts denial with a tangible, physical expression of the loss. Right? Not an act of denial. Understand that there is a loss here. Feel that there is a loss here. And impels the onset of the mourning process for those who are too numb to feel, and says, you should feel it. Let it be part of a process that you'll be going through at this moment. And as I mentioned before, it also reminds that it's only the outer garments that are affected. The purpose of Shiva. What's the purpose of Shiva? Creates a space of grief and heal, prevents mourning from becoming lonely, and the week is spent discussing the life and achievements of the departed. And this is what Shiva should be. And again, Shiva is not for parties. It's not for enjoying deli. And I mean, there should be food there. You should order food for the mourners. And that's important because the mourners are not supposed to go out. And the mourners should not be working. And the mourners should not be buying or shopping. And that's the reason that food is sent to a Shiva house. It's not sent to the Shiva house so that there could just be ongoing 7 days of party. It's sent there so that the mourners could have what to eat. There's actually two different opinions as to whether or not one should eat in the Shiva house. It's a different opinion of the Ashkenazi or Sephardi custom, but that's for another time. But the point is, this is what needs to be the focus of Shiva. Creating a space to grieve and heal, prevents the mourning from becoming lonely, and spending time discussing life and achievements of the departed. Of course, a lot of these aspects over the last year were lost because of the social distancing. And this was very, very tragic that for people who lost loved ones over the last year, that they not only did they have to go through a loss, but they also were not able to mourn properly because of the whole social distancing thing. And yeah, there was Shiva on Zoom or whatever, but of course that doesn't take place of seeing a friend in real life and actually being there for them. So that's something very, very tragic that happened. A wound on top of the already burning wound that those who were mourning could not actually experience a real Shiva, which was very sad. Battery's about to die. The soul of the computer is running low. Okay. Next. So when spend the right learning, praying, giving charity, performing good deeds in the merit of the loved ones. Some people try write a Torah for a loved one. We have here a Torah that was written in memory of my grandparents. A Torah takes the place. The Torah is also a soul. It's a Jewish soul. And the Jewish soul being expressed in that way, knowing that others are going to be reading from a Torah in their memory, giving charity, making a dedication in memory of the loved one. That's why when it comes to Yizkor, it's important to dedicate something to them because you're making something tangible that the soul could actually connect to in this physical world. That mitzvah that the soul is connecting to actually affects and benefits the soul in the world to come. Now, why is it that that you have it in this way? 3 days, 7 days, 30 days. So you have a phased process. By doing the phased process, you're able to transform grieving into an active, forward-moving process. And each of these milestones, be it 3 days, 7 days, 30 days, and a year, impel the mourner to move on to the next phase of mourning and to be able to use it in a positive way, as we'll soon see. But this helps the mourner get through it when it's broken down in this way. The first 3 days are the most difficult, and then the 4 after that is more of a Shiva process, and then the 7 and then the month after, then the year. Another thing I should point out, a lot of people say they'll just do 1 day of Shiva or 3 days of Shiva or 7 days of Shiva, or not 7 days of Shiva. And the reason that it's done 7 days is because when it's broken up in this way, the first 3 days, when it's much more difficult for the mourner and it's still fresh, so it's much more difficult to comfort them or console them. So if you're only taking that 1 day, the comforting process is not going to happen in a real way unless you give it that time that it needs, that healing time that it needs, and that's why it's 7 days.
Rabbi,
Yeah.
I understand that at Shabbos, you're not supposed to have mourning. Is that
On Shabbos, the question was on Shabbos you don't do any public mourning. So that means anything that is physically visible to the public. So don't wear the torn garment on Shabbos. You don't stay at home. You go to synagogue, and you say Kaddish still. You don't do any, but things that are done private mourning. Again, it's not going through all the laws of mourning. Certain things that should be done or not be done. But yeah, in general, Shabbos doesn't have mourning. What's the next point? And the idea of mandatory. What's the idea of mandatory mourning? And why do you say, well, let a person feel whatever they feel? Well, a lot of times there's denial, and there's not it's not being brought out. So when you say that it's a mitzvah to mourn, it's allowing the person to actively mourn and be involved in this process that otherwise they are trying to deny and get out of their mind. And like I said, a lot of times people, after a loved one passes, they just want to get it off their mind, go out to a restaurant and eat and just try not to think about it. And this is not the Jewish way. The Jewish way is to think about it and to allow it to be there. And It expressed an appreciation for the gifts of life, because when you have the Shiva, it allows others to talk about the one that has departed, to talk about their gifts that they had, to talk about what they meant to the world, to talk about what they meant to their friends, to their community, and so on. And it benefits the departed soul because the soul is there as well in the Shiva house. That's why it should be done, best to be done in the home of the actual departed, because the soul is there being in that Shiva, mourning together with the mourners and being part of that process as well. The soul is there too. Another thing I mentioned earlier about cremation. So one thing that you see about Jewish burial, as opposed to the two other ways, which one is cremation and the other one is doing things that keeps the body, preserving the body, such as embalming or mausoleums or mummies or whatever it is. So these are the two extremes that you have. One extreme is to cremate, which says get rid of it quickly, get rid of the body quickly. And the other extreme is preserve it, let it be here. You even have some cultures and religions where they take the body out every year, whatever. Weird stuff you can find on YouTube. Anyway, so the Jewish way says, let the body go through the natural process of deterioration. No, don't do anything to the body. It goes in the ground. It goes to the place where it came from. Goes to its natural place of creation. It disposes of itself naturally with its own nutrients, the way it was made about. And we allow the body to be done in that way. Pine, any wood as opposed to metal, because metal again doesn't allow anything to be done there, and wood naturally.
Or the best one is just to wrap the body and put it under.
Well, that's the way they do it in Israel.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah, really.
outside in Israel they don't use coffins at all. But we just do it now, and even here, it's they put holes in the bottom. It should be in the dirt. Man is created from dust and returns to the dust, as it says. And the reason, I'm checking if anyone has any questions. No. And so this was something interesting that Daron Kornblath, who spoke about this, pointed this out, that you're talking about the mourning process. The mourners, also part of that is the body itself of the deceased is allowing the body also to go through its process of slowly deteriorating in a natural way, the way it's meant to be. Yeah. No, there's no law of wearing black. Someone asked, how do we know that the soul of departed is present at the Shiva? Anything that we know about souls is from Kabbalistic sources. And the same is true about here. Kabbalah was taught by individuals, passed down from Moses, but it wasn't actually in the written Torah. Yeah.
I heard once that when you're in mourning, the soul goes back to certain levels.
Yeah, so that's what I said. So the soul is there during the Shiva process, and then I probably didn't make this clear. It's there during the Shiva process, and then eventually the soul starts to elevate from level to level over the next 30 days and then over the year. In other words, while the mitzvah of mourning is broken down in this way, the soul is affected in this way too, and the soul is still somewhat connected to the body. And that's why actually it does say that for the first year, not to go visit a gravesite because the soul is still hovering over the body as it's going through its process of judgment in the world to come, and that sort of disturbs the soul within the first year. That's why a lot of people don't do the headstone until after a year. There's different customs, but again, the idea is that the soul that's connected there does go through different stages, the same way the mourners go through different stages.
So is that why they wait for a year to put the headstone on?
There's different customs. That's why some people do. The Chabad custom is actually to put it on right after Shiva. That's why some people do. Okay, now the soul, yeah.
Can you spend a little bit more time on that? Because like my mother on her husband's grave, she waited a year to the day. This is the first I've heard of that.
There's different customs with placing the headstone. Some people place it after a year. Some people place it after the Shiva. Some people place it after 30 days. There's different customs, and that's all there is to be said about it. So whichever custom you want to go about, you can do.
Based on countries that they came from?
It's based on the reason and traditions that you have, what is the reason for the headstone, and there's different reasons for it, but what primary focus you want to look at.
So it's not written anywhere that there's a specific time to put a headstone on? I mean, religious
People, different sages wrote based on what their custom was. So I'm telling you, the Chabad custom is to put it in right after Shiva. This is an unusual custom. Most people have the custom to wait a year.
I like that.
Okay,
Especially with.
because you're a Chabadnik, that's why.
What if you don't make it, like you're the loved one, and you wait that year, let's say you're gonna wait that year still, and you pass before that, you'll never see that stone on top of
No,
your.
could be, okay.
I'm doing 32 days.
I don't-
36. That's
Do
too far.
you want me to repeat what you said? No, listen, whatever. There's different customs, and each person, if you want to have a private discussion of, whatever your particular case is, then we could. And this is true for anyone. If anyone wants to discuss their own situation, I'll be happy to talk with you. So you're saying the body should not be tampered with before burial. I'm not sure what the definition of tampered with. The body does do. There is a process called tahara, which is a purification process that is done on the body by pouring water. It's done through the Chevra Kadisha. Most people are not able to do this. You have to know what you're doing. Chevra Kadisha, the Jewish Burial Society. But doing anything such as embalming the body or anything of that nature is correct. That should not be done in Jewish law, and definitely not cremation. Okay, one more question on this, and then we're going to move on.
About the mausoleum. The rabbi couldn't even join a congregant that got buried in a mausoleum.
Mausoleum is the same problem. Okay, again, mausoleum is basically not putting the body back into ground. So it's not allowing the soul the body to go through its natural course.
The rabbi couldn't even be there.
You'll talk to a specific rabbi if a question comes up, and whatever. Yeah. If a body has to be transported, then you speak to the Chevra Kadisha, the Jewish Burial Society, and you ask them how to go about that. Again, it's not a black and white. It has to be dealt with. Very sensitive issue, and it could be done. We know Jewish history. We find Joseph said, "Take my bones to be buried in Israel," right? And we find many times that it was done that way, and historically it has been done that way. But it needs to be dealt with case by case. I can't give a general answer on that. Okay.
Well, it sounds
Um,
like if there's something in the Torah, you can give a complete, this is how it is in the Torah. If it's not in the Torah, then you say something like, this is a custom of this group or whatever. It can be altered if it's not in the Torah. If it's in the Torah,
Well,
you say.
again, you're asking a very general question about how to go about the commandments in the Torah versus rabbinical commandments. I did teach an entire course on it called Judaism Decoded, and I believe it is on my YouTube channel, and it's an entire course on its own, which as far as what could be altered, what can't, there could be different opinions on certain things not. And I think you joined the course Judaism Decoded. I taught it online. But if something is not a biblical commandment, then there is what to work with, and that's why there are different opinions on certain things. Okay, let's continue on to text number 7, which is another very central element of the Torah's approach, and that is entirely absent of any psychological model. And that is the connection between the mourning process that's undergone by the loved ones of the deceased and the experience of the departed soul itself. And that is, as we see in text number 7, the ethics of our Father says, a single moment of repentance and good deeds in this world is greater than the whole of life in the world to come. And a single moment of gratification in this world to come is greater than the whole of life in this world. So these are two statements that sound like they're almost opposites. First we say, a single moment of repentance and good deeds in this world is greater than the whole life in the world to come. But then we say a single moment of gratification in the world to come is greater than the whole life in this world. And this is to tell us that what we accomplish in this world is actually much greater than a soul could accomplish in a spiritual sense. And that's the whole reason why a soul does come to this world to begin with. Because God wants the soul to be engulfed in a physical place. Okay, wait, take that for a second. God wants the soul to be in a physical place where it could accomplish things in this physical world. And the Torah and mitzvahs that's done in this world are all done in physical senses and physical things. Every single mitzvah is associated with physical things. And the magnitude of what we could achieve is much greater than infinite spiritual realms. And that's why a soul could accomplish so much more than an angel can when it comes down into this world. And so any moment that we're able to do another mitzvah in this world could be greater than all the worlds to come together. So, but in the world to come, what the soul experiences in that world is greater than anything that it could experience in this world, because it could actually see the glory and the infinite of what it has accomplished while being in this world. And so there's actually a double-edged sword here. For the soul, it brings both joy and distress at the time of death. On one hand, it allows the soul to move to a place that it could experience greatness. It could experience all the incredible things that it has achieved. But at the same time, the action that's there is not able to be expressed. The things that it's able to do, the opportunities for what it's able to accomplish is no more there. And all you could do is look and say, this is all that's able to be done. In a physical sense, you could have it a little bit. You know, if you have an older man who worked very hard to build up an empire of some sort, and then eventually he's no more physically capable of doing it. children take over the business, and he just looks and is able to admire everything that he did, knowing that he no more has the physical capabilities, but the children are in that state. And when you see it in this way, every mitzvah that's done in this world now affects that soul. So when the mourners are now doing something in honor or memory of that soul, that actually affects the soul in the higher world. That affects the soul in a way that we can't see it physically, but it affects it tremendously. There was a man named Reb Nachum Rabinowitz. He was one of the Hasidim in Jerusalem. He was a very wealthy man, and tragedy had befallen him, and he lost his only son. And he didn't know what to do. He went to many rabbis to try and find comfort. And one of the places that he went to was to visit the Lubavitcher Rebbe. And he was able to get a private audience. He enters the Rebbe's room. I'm sorry, I need to correct something. Rabbi Nachum Rabinowitz is seeing what happened who went into the Rebbe's room for a private audience. And when he came back, he asked him what had happened. So he explained to him that he had an only son. He was very wealthy, but he had one only son who had died, God forbid. And he went to many rabbis to try and find consolation, and he couldn't find that anywhere. He says, I went to the Rebbe for some solace and for some advice. And he says like this. He says that he explained to him, imagine if you had your son that went overseas and was working somewhere overseas. And you were not able to have any contact with him, but the only thing you could do is to send him packages and gifts. And you were able to know that those gifts were reaching your son where he was overseas. That you were able to know, but you could just never hear back from him. He says, would you be happy to be sending him gifts knowing that he's getting it? He says, yes, of course. He says, well, when your son is in the next world, every mitzvah that you do in his honor and his memory is sending him a gift. You're not getting the reciprocity of that gift. Or should I say, you don't feel the reciprocity of the gift, but you should know that he's getting it if it's done in his merit and in his honor. And so the soul can continue to accomplish in this world through others that are doing things in their merit. And that's why it's so important to study Torah, to learn Mishnah, to give tzedakah, to give charity, to give dedications, to do things in their merit and in their honor. Ecclesiastes says, text number 7, it is better to go to the house of mourning than to go to a house of feasting, as in the very end of every man, and the living shall take to its heart. What does it mean, the living shall take to its heart? It means that while living, the people that are living could take to heart on behalf of those who have departed. One more text to conclude with. The whole of creation is descent and the downward evolution from above to below. The divine intention being that this should lead to elevation after elevation. The same applies to death and mourning for the departed as well as for the mourners. So mourning enables the grieving individual to come out in a better place than before the loss. And so we need to take to the heart. What are some examples of taking to heart? Giving tzedakah, studying Mishnah, lighting candles in their memory, and doing things in their memory. And finally, there is one more thing. In the classic model that we began with, the Kubler-Ross model, the end goal is acceptance. And over there, she says that the best case scenario is that a person could go on living life as they were. But the truth is that recent studies have found that there is another final way, a final approach. That is what's called post-traumatic growth, where the mourning brings elevation for both the departed soul and for the mourner. And the goal is to emerge from the mourning process in a better place than they were before. And not to only say, at least to try and live life. And this is something that's very important now, especially now, after going through a whole year of challenges for the entire world. Coming out of this, which we see things are starting to normalize a little bit. People are starting to get vaccinated. They're starting to go out again. When you come out of it, are you going to say, we can cope with the new reality? Or are you going to say, we're going to be better than we were before? So let's take a look at a video that expresses this, which we'll show now. Reality? Or are you going to say, we're going to be better than we were
After the
before?
loss of a loved one might think that the best
So let's
case
take a look at a
scenario
video
for
that
recovery
expresses this.
is that the person resumes the life they had before in a way that is as close to normal as possible. However, Richard Tedeschi, a psychologist at the University of North Carolina, has identified an amazing phenomenon whereby a traumatic event impels a
After the
person
loss
to
of a
better
loved one,
place.
one might think
better
that the
intellectually,
best case
scenario for
emotionally,
recovery
and
is
is that the
spiritually.
person
He
resumes the
named
life
this
they had
phenomenon
before in a way that is as close to normal and encountered it when interviewing people. However, Richard Tedeschi, a psychologist at the University of North Carolina, has identified an amazing phenomenon told him the same whereby a traumatic event
They wished deeply that
after
they
the
had
loss
not
of a
lost
loved
a
one.
spouse.
One might think better intellectually, but
nonetheless,
emotionally,
the
and is that the
experience
person
changed
resumes
them.
the
He
life
named
they
this
had before
phenomenon
in a way that is as
a recent
close
New
to
York Times
normal
article
and
has
encountered
this
it when
phenomenon
interviewing.
in the
However,
context
Richard
of
Tedeschi, a
bipolar
psychologist at the University
older
of
people
North
who are
Carolina,
in
2005 has
while
identified in Iraq phenomenon
Sergeant
whereby a
veterans,
traumatic
they
event
wished deeply that
after
they
the
had
loss
not
of a
lost
loved
a
one.
spouse.
One might think better intellectually, but nonetheless, the experience is that the person resumes the life they had before in a way that is as recent New York Times and encountered it when interviewing. However, Richard Tedeschi, a psychologist at the University of Physical in 2005 has identified in Iraq phenomenon whereby a traumatic event after the loss of a loved one. One might think better intellectually, but nonetheless, the experience is that the person resumes the life they had before in a way that is as recent New York Times and encountered it when interviewing. However, Richard Tedeschi, a psychologist at the University of Physical in 2005 has identified in Iraq phenomenon whereby a traumatic event after the loss of a loved one. One might think better intellectually, but nonetheless, the experience is that the person resumes the life they had before in a way that is as recent when bombing and encountered stress and however, Richard Tedeschi, a psychologist at the University of Physical in 2005 has identified in Iraq phenomenon whereby a traumatic event after the loss of a loved one. One might think better intellectually, but nonetheless, the experience is that the person resumes the life they had before in a recent when bombing and encountered stress and however, Richard Tedeschi, a psychologist at the University of Physical in 2005 has identified Tedeschi whereby a traumatic event after the loss of a loved one. One might think better intellectually, but nonetheless, the experience is that the person resumes the life they had before in a recent when bombing and encountered stress and however, Richard Tedeschi, a psychologist at the University of Physical in 2005 has identified Tedeschi whereby a traumatic event after the loss of a loved one. One might think better intellectually, but nonetheless, the experience is that the person resumes the life they had before in a recent when bombing and it is better struggling myself. However, ultimately just to surface, but and that I am in 2009, for Bell Rights to death. I also said JLI they reached that after managing branches out to one black sweater and one but nonetheless, the extent is more effective. So that was the experience starting out when Bonnie and it is better struggling myself. However, ultimately just to surface, but and that I am in 2009, for Bell Rights to death. I also branches out to one black sweater and one but nonetheless, the extent is more effective. So that was the experience starting out when Bonnie and it is better struggling myself. However,
I said to her, I don't know what to do. And she said, you have to do something to mark his 14th birthday. And I didn't know what to do. I was in this area on the lawn, getting the lawn with my children who were little. They were 12, 11, and 6. And I didn't know what to do.
and it is better struggling myself. However,
So my friend Shira, for Kobe's birthday, for his 14th birthday, I said to her, I don't know what to do. And she said, you have to do something to mark his 14th
Can't see the video.
birthday. And I didn't know what to do. I was down in this area on the
and it is better struggling myself. However,
children who were little. They saw my friend Shira and said, and for Kobe's birthday, for his 14th birthday, I said to her, living in Israel, what to do. She said, you have to do something to mark his 14th.
Can't see the video.
But we walked right by it. And then we said, I didn't know what to do. I was down in my kids went to order, and
and it is better struggling myself. However,
who worked little. I saw my friend Shira and said, and then Kobe's birthday just fell into my head. For his 14th birthday, I said to her, living in Israel, what to do. She said, you have to do something to mark his 14th.
Can't see the video.
But we walked right by it. The kids came back to the table, and I said, I didn't know what to do. I said, I was down to do, and my kids went to order,
and it is better struggling myself. However,
and a minute after I saw my friend Shira and said, and then Kobe's birthday just fell into my head. For his 14th birthday, I said, living in Israel, what to do. She said, you have to do something to mark his 14th. But we walked right by it. The kids came back to the table, and I said, I didn't know what to do. I said, I was down to do, and my kids went to order,
and it is better struggling myself. However,
and a minute after I saw my friend Shira and said, and Kobe's birthday just fell to down in the floor to the birthday. I said, living in Israel, what to do. She said, you have to do something to mark his 14th. So we walked right by it. The kids came back to the table, and I said, I didn't know what to do. I said, I was chasing, and my kids went to order,
and it is better struggling myself. However,
and we were running up and down and said, and Kobe's birthday just fell to down in the floor to the birthday. I said, taking a very but she'll say, you have to do something. I have to do that we want to run this came and nothing else. And I didn't know what to do. I was chasing the kids went around and
and it is better struggling myself. However,
and we were running up and down and said, and Kobe's birthday just fell to down in the floor to the birthday.
Look.
And that's what we did.
And that's what